Okay, so I think we're all aware of what's going on in Cuba. And the question I have for everybody today, should Canada get involved? We know the orange dictator is causing problems and blocking oil to the country, but it's turning into a humanitarian crisis right now. And even nations like Mexico and China are stepping up. So I want to talk about this in today's video, and we're going to get right into it. The first report I have is at a CACH television in Ontario.
Some of the last flights from Cuba are scheduled to land here in southern Ontario tonight as Canadian airlines wind down their travel to the island.
It leaves behind a nation and its people isolated by an economic and potential humanitarian crisis that's being blamed on the United States. Al Sweeney is covering the story for us tonight and joins us in studio with the latest. Al.
Matt, we spoke to one Cuban living here in Hamilton today who tells us it's a struggle for her family just to survive back in Cuba. And we spoke to Canadians heading home from Cuba while they can. Gary and Diana Ferris of Brantford were scheduled for one of those planes landing in Canada this evening.
It appears that we're going to be one of the last flights out of Cuba.
They're ending their Cuban vacation with airline fuel shortages, forcing tourists to leave the island's vacation resorts and beaches.
There's stacks and stacks and stacks of empty lounges because people have had to leave early.
And as the days have progressed, the dining room is getting emptier and emptier and emptier.
It's being called the collapse of Cuba's vital tourism industry.
Now, we all know that this is caused by the orange dictator, and hopefully all the tourists that were vacationing there can get out on the flights. But what does that mean for the locals? They're the innocent ones here. This has all started because the Orange McNugget declared a national emergency in late January, labeling Cuba as an unusual, extraordinary threat. Now, we're not stupid. There's an ulterior motive to this. Kind of like how he said Canada was a threat because we had fentanyl coming across the border. Or same with Venezuela. And then it ended up being about the oil. So we all know that the orange dictator has some sort of ulterior motive on this.
It is really serious. It hasn't been so tough for Cubans for many, many, many years. It isn't just the fact that airlines can't come in, or not, some aren't coming in because they can't get fuel to get out. It means that the tourist industry, what little was left, has collapsed.
The crisis follows President Donald Trump's latest attack on Cuba's economy, cutting off oil it relies on from countries like Venezuela.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. I don't know if they can hold out.
It's saying like Cuba will not survive, and because this is the worst crisis that we ever saw.
Yaima Frassard is a Cuban living in Hamilton, worried about her mother and other family members in Cuba.
Hospitals right now are closed because we don't have medicine, we don't have electricity.
Now, I have another report after that talks about the medical supplies that are being sent to Cuba. But what the orange dictator is doing is having a wider scale effect, not just on the oil, but the way of life for the locals. Now, this is just my opinion, and I had a conversation with one of our viewers. It seems like this whole Cuba crisis isn't getting as much attention as it should be. Sure, there's a lot of articles and reports when it comes to like tourists getting out, but it definitely isn't getting as much attention as what Greenland was. But with all these global situations, the cause of all of them is just one reason, this guy here. I have been thinking about expanding my channel and talking about things on a more global basis. Even though I'm not an expert though, the least I can do is get everybody aware of what's going on. If this is something you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below. I'm actually curious to hear your feedback.
My big concern is people. The Cuban people is suffering. Some people has nothing to it.
The United Nations is warning of a humanitarian collapse in Cuba because of the American blockade.
The Secretary General is extremely concerned about the humanitarian situation in Cuba, which will worsen, if not collapse, if its oil needs go unmet.
Other countries are trying to help. Mexico is sending supplies to Cuba, and Canada says it's going to be sending humanitarian aid. Canadian tourists are hoping the crisis is resolved, while Cubans see a bleak future.
I hope it's going to be temporary because Cubans really need the tourism, and I know Canadians play a big part of it.
People is dying, people is suffering, people is trying to survive. They have nothing, and I really would like a call for that kindness. I'm Canadian and try to help. The only future I saw right now, it's black. There's no hope.
Yeah, Ima is calling on Canada to find a way to help the people of Cuba. As it is, she says, even if she sends food and medicine to her family in Cuba, she can't be sure it will reach them because of the oil and transportation crisis.
The part that is really bad in all of this is at citizen level, there's not much we can do because the orange dictator has made it so hard for anybody else to help, which is why I believe, and it's just my opinion, it's got to be at the government level. Now, the problem with that as well is if any governments decide to help, the man-child in the White House will probably start to throw tariffs at everyone again. Now, this next report just emphasizes more on how the orange dictator is really causing problems, more on the humanitarian level.
For years, registered nurse Simone Feller has helped send medical supplies to Cuba with the help of tourists.
Travelers will take a suitcase of medical supplies with them and then actually bring it to a clinic or a hospital. We'll have things like face shields, lots of masks.
But with fuel shortages prompting Canadian Airlines to suspend service, there's no travelers and no supplies.
The need is still there. It's very sad. I worry for the people in Cuba.
U.S. President Donald Trump's executive order imposing tariffs on countries supplying oil to Cuba has cut off a precious resource.
It's used in, energy for hospitals, clinics, old folks' homes. You could actually call this a crime against humanity because this kind of thing costs lives.
Dr. Timothy Bode sends donated medical supplies to Cuba through the Nova Scotia-Cuba Association and still hopes to send a full shipping container in April.
Now, with no flights going to Cuba and no tourists able to bring over supplies, the shipping container is the only option. But my question is that shipping container actually going to be able to arrive? We already know that he has threats if any other countries decide to help with the oil. But who knows, he may do the same thing if any country decides to send aid.
And as far as I know, ships can still go to Cuba with supplies. For example, Mexico has sent 2 ships to Cuba with aid.
The price of the fuel for the taxis is going up.
Jeff Goodspeed often stays in Cuba for long periods and has helped Cubans for decades in a cultural exchange. The Nova Scotian musician sends instruments to Cuban youth in the same container as Dr. Bode's medical supplies. He says Canadians and Cubans now have another shared experience, trade tensions with Trump.
Cuba's been on the front line of this thing for many years, and here they are again.
With estimates Cuba could run out of fuel in 3 months, one international development professor says things will get worse for Cubans, but other nations could step in.
If countries in the Americas and Europe take that stand, then that in itself flexes that autonomy against Trump's bellicosity in the hemisphere.
And why not send aid on behalf of the government the way Mexico is doing? Why not?
A question from nonprofits who say they're not done trying to help Cubans in crisis.
I feel like countries around the world need to kind of step up because we're in a position right now where one nation is causing havoc around the world. Now, I'm no expert in this topic, and to be honest, I'm kind of getting out of my comfort zone right now. But talking on a moral basis, we're witnessing a man-child go around the world threatening people, throwing sanctions on countries, and most likely because he wants to help his billionaires. But now is the time for countries around the world to really kind of band together, even if they weren't allies in the past or even if we were not close to another country. Stand side by side and show the world that we're not going to take the orange dictator's crap anymore. Because my biggest fear is that if the world keeps being apathetic about things, there's still 3 years left of the Orange McNugget being in office, and a lot of damage could be done within that time. Okay, that's all I got for today's video. But I am going to make a promise to myself that I am going to start to explore more topics, more global topics, that I think we should all be aware of. If you found any value in anything I said today, or you want to hear more from a Canadian point of view, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button below, so that way you're notified of my future videos. Thanks everyone, I'll see you in the next one.